Alright, how are you guys doing? Today we'll talk about Plato. There are two discussions on Plato, but as usual I do want to make one video trying to explain all the important points, everything you need to know in a more approachable way, hopefully much shorter and with writing on the board the way it is normally done in a classroom. So why do we even talk about Plato? Plato is extremely important. Plato is one of these two key figures on which the entire Western philosophy essentially rests, Plato and Aristotle. Now, we did talk about Socrates last time, and remember I said Socrates never left any writing, but we can look at the early dialogues of Plato and understand what approximately Socrates was doing. What exactly was he doing? Remember, he was approaching these various people in Athens, getting into conversation with them, using his dialectical method, trying to get them to answer questions. What were these questions? Usually he was looking for something like a definition of different words, different terms, something like what is beauty, what is justice, and Plato himself takes that to the whole new level. He was very faithful to his teacher, to Socrates, and after his death he was extremely devastating, but then he decided to take whatever he learned and develop it further. Now, this is where we actually will distinguish what Plato was doing from what Socrates was doing, and his later dialogues are definitely taking it to the whole new level. Another source which we can actually use to understand that is Aristotle. Aristotle never met Socrates. He was born many years after Socrates was already dead. However, he was a student of Plato. So naturally, he was in Athens when not just Plato but many other people who personally knew Socrates were still alive. And he had conversation with them and definitely had conversations with Plato, so he would know. And he in his work tells us that actually historic Socrates only was interested in this kind of clarifying terms, definitions, and he mostly dedicated himself to ethical questions, questions of morality, how should we live. So everything on top of that, all these theories which we'll talk about today, they are definitely Plato's creation. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about Republic, because Republic is a great work to understand Plato's ideas. It's actually considered from his middle period, so in other words, it's not his latest work, not something he did right before he died, but it also is not an early work. Republic has a number of books, so-called books. They are more like chapters really in our terms, but they called books because at the time I guess there was a large amount of written material for the Greeks. So the first book is actually a lot the way Socrates, historic Socrates, was doing things. It's created in a similar way. It talks about justice. The entire Republic is about justice. The first dialogue is a very Socratic way to approach it. Socrates starts by having a conversation with this old man Cephalus. And old man is about to die. That is, what you would expect for most old people. They are thinking about afterlife, about the time when they die. And he is actually rather relaxed about that. And he tells Socrates, I have nothing to worry about after I die because I was just in all my life. And Socrates asks him, so what exactly do you think justice is? And he says, well, justice is to pay back what you owe and to give back whatever you've taken from other people. So that's what I did. It's an interesting definition. And Socrates immediately jumps on that, and conversation goes on for a while, but it doesn't really reach complete solution as to what is justice in the first book. In fact, the rest of the Republic goes into a great detail trying to answer this question, and the answer which Plato gives us is very interesting and in fact explains a lot about his philosophy. So what is justice? At one point, still in book 1, a person named Tracy Marcus actually gets into the conversation upon hearing what Socrates was saying, and basically Socrates was saying justice is when you treat everyone well, not just your friends, but your enemies too. This is what Socrates himself was saying about justice. Note that it actually is a very Christian idea to give your other cheek, but that is taking place about 350 years before Christ was even born. In fact, more than that probably. Okay, Tracy Marcus steps in and says, what a bunch of nonsense. What he is actually saying is that justice is something rich people invented, or rather powerful people. Justice is doing what's in their interests. It's not in the interest of a little man. Why does little man follow justice, says Tracy Marcus? Because he is too weak. He or she can't make their own rules, so they have to follow the rules made by the wealthy people, by the rich people, by the powerful people, by the people who have all the power, by the people who actually control the republic, the people who control the state, those who make laws. He never actually says rich people, I'm saying it myself, but the idea is the same. Powerful people, right? Okay, that's his definition, and he's sticking to it. Now, interestingly enough, like I said, Plato actually spends the entire book trying to answer that. At first, with a very Socratic way of arguing with Tracy Marcus. Tracy Marcus gets mad about that. He thinks this is not really a fair way to approach the subject. Now, leaving aside Tracy Marcus, there are two other people who get into the conversation, Glaucon and Adimantus, who, by the way, named after Plato's brothers, so they actually are kind of not a random names, although in the book he never says they're his brothers. And they ask him too. They ask him, what do you think thou justice is? Because in general, most people look at justice as something we should do, but they don't look at it as a good in itself. So let's look at it a little bit closely. Now, Glaucon says there are three different things you can say about things which are good, things which are pleasant. You can divide it into three different categories. So three different types of good things, things which are good for themselves. What are those? He says, well, enjoying the sunset or some other pleasant activity. Now, there are also things which are good for themselves and for their consequences. What could that be? Well, something like exercise, something which you enjoy while you're doing that, and then you also have something good afterwards, which is good health. And finally, there are things which are good only for their consequences, but in themselves they are not very good. And modern example, good modern example would be, this is not Glaucon's example obviously, but going to a dentist. Glaucon does mention going to a doctor. So dentist is better example. Not pleasant at all. Doctor can be fine, but dentist, who enjoys that? What crazy person enjoys that? Why do we do it? For the consequences. The consequences of having good teeth, good oral hygiene is obviously something we want to have, and for this reason we're doing it even though it's unpleasant. So Glaucon says this is what justice is. Justice is not very pleasant in itself, but there are good consequences. What does he mean by that? He means that when you are being just to other people are being just to you. And also, they respect you better. So even though being just to other people is not really smart, because that means you are missing the opportunity to perhaps enrich yourself or to get something which you would like to get otherwise, but you have to do it because other people not going to like you very much, and then they will punish you, and then you'll be worse off. So essentially what he's saying is that we don't really want to be just, but we have to. And there's actually this excellent story of the Ring of Judges, which he also tells Socrates as to illustrate the story. He says there was this guy named Judges. He found the magical ring. If you twist that ring, you become invisible. And he says as soon as he found that out, he was able to use his invisibility to basically do all these things which are not obviously very just, but nonetheless benefited him. He managed to seduce the king's wife somehow using that invisibility, and then take over the kingdom by using her help to murder the king. So the idea is this: each and every one of us would be like that. Why do we have to be just? Well, because otherwise we can get arrested, we can go to jail, and so on. Now, Socrates says that's not the case. And note again that Socrates in this case is Socrates. That is already Plato himself talking. He is using Socrates just to illustrate the point. So he is saying, no, justice actually is good for itself and for its consequences. It's in this category. It actually is something which does us some benefit as well as everybody else. How come? How is he explaining that? Well, the rest of Republic actually goes into great detail. So let's take a look at it. First of all, the important thing you have to know is the way Plato describes human soul. Human soul, he's saying that justice is actually a feature of our soul, and for this reason it's important to understand how our soul operates. Okay, so this is Plato's idea of the human soul. This is how he says we operate. Our soul has reasoning part, it has spirited part, and it has appetitive part. What are these parts? Well, the reasoning part is reason. Each one of us has reason. But if all we had was reason, and note that this is actually where he starts to disagree a little bit with Socrates, who actually thought that if we use our reason, if we use our knowledge, we would actually be always doing good things. But Plato says, no, not quite. We have these two other parts of our soul. Remember, soul in Greek is psyche, which is why we have the word psychology derived from the Greek psyche. So, three parts of psyche would be reasoning, spirited, and appetitive. Spirited part, what is that? He says that is the part of our soul which actually is emotional. This is a part which kicks in anytime we're getting angry, for example. When you're getting upset, when you are acting because of your emotion rather than of your reason. And we do that a lot, right? Sometimes our reason tells us you should not yell, you should not be angry, but that spirited part carries us and we are yelling, stomping our feet, even though we know as a result we may be worse off than if we never did that, if we talk calmly. What is the appetitive part? Well, that's kind of these bodily desires we have. We want food, we want drink, most importantly probably we want sex, right? This is very human thing to do, and sometimes again that part takes over. Note that sometimes your reason tells you, well, maybe you shouldn't have sex, but you still do that. Why do you do that? Because that part takes over. He actually, in another dialogue called Phaedrus, he compares that to a chariot. A chariot in the Greek world was this carriage with two horses. So that's exactly how he sees that. This is one horse, the spirited part. This is another horse, the appetitive part. And reasoning part, that's the driver. He is the reason. But sometimes horses can get away. the driver doesn't always control the horses. Both horses are important to be in control. He says spirited one is probably a little more in control, appetitive one a little less. All of them, however, are important in order for chariot to move forward. It cannot be moved forward by reasoning alone. Reason has to work with this. And based on that, he also talks about virtues. Remember the word arete, virtue? He says there actually are 4 virtues in a human being. Let's look at them. So these are the 4 virtues. Wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. What are they? How are they related to these parts of the soul? Well, wisdom is when reason is in control. When reason is in control, we have wisdom. How about courage? Well, courage requires some wisdom too. However, it is related to the spiritual horse. This is when you actually do those brave things, but you don't do them without using your reason. You're using them reasonably. You can be courageous in a battle, but that means that your reason tells you this is the right battle to fight. And if you are trying to be brave in a situation when you really shouldn't be engaged in, that's not courage. That is something else. Now, how about temperance? Temperance is actually something related to that other horse, to appetites. Temperance is when you actually do things in moderation, be it sex, food, drink, or any other bodily pleasures. You have to moderate them, and you need to use that in combination with your wisdom again, and even with your courage, because the 2 horses must be in step. So the correct balance between wisdom, courage, and your self-control, your temperance, that is the best state of things. And guess what? This is what he says is justice. Justice in this case is an internal rather than external element. He says that within a human being, justice must also be present, and it puts human being in correct balance. Because even if you live in a just society, being unjust yourself does damage to you by throwing things off balance within your soul. Now, then he actually takes it to the next level, and he says it's a better way to illustrate it with the society as a whole. So this is when the part of the Republics begin, in which Plato actually describes the life in this ideal state, which he constructs from scratch. Basically what he's saying there is, if we could set up this perfect society, what he thinks perfect society would be, this is how we would make it. And this is what would be that justice in a society, which can then be applied to our idea of justice within the soul. Okay, so in his Republic, Plato actually distinguishes 3 types of people. He says the division between the types of people is important, because not everyone can be anybody. Plato thinks that different types of people are better suited for different things. Now, he says there should be workers or laborers, this kind of regular folk type of part of the society. They'll be making goods, trading goods. They will live more or less like normal people do. But he says there should also be guardians, and he actually distinguishes 2 types of guardians which will be in his ideal society. One type will be what he calls auxiliaries, or a type of soldiers. They'll be the ones battling for the Republic. The other type will be selected among those auxiliaries who are the best, which is why both of them are kind of called guardians, because they are still guardians. But some of them are guardians as the soldiers, that is auxiliaries. The other ones are guardians as rulers. The best ones among those soldiers will become rulers of the entire Republic. Note that rulers to him also should be philosophers. In fact, those best ones among the guardians are all philosophers. He has very interesting explanation as to how these guardians should live, and guardians should have 2 things. One of them is they should not have any property, and the other one is they should not have any family. How are they going to have sex and stuff like that? Well, he actually says that they should run some sort of random draw when guardians will be assigned women through random draw, and it should rotate all the time. Although at one point, and it's actually kind of an interesting thing which I didn't talk about during the discussion, at one point he also adds that the rulers should sometimes fix the draw and make it not so random. It will appear random, but in reality they would want to match the best with the best to have the best children. So a little bit of cheating there. Nonetheless, for guardian themselves it would look like a random draw. They will be selecting their partners based on this random draw, and that's how they will have sex. But once the children are born, the children will immediately be taken away from them and growing up in some sort of organized manner separately from their parents. Why? Why this kind of insanity? Well, he thought that actually that will help to have equal start in life for all these children, so that their parents wouldn't have any influence on their life. So remember, I mentioned during the discussions that one reason why society cannot be completely fair to everybody, any society really, as far as we know, is because people don't get equal start in life. Some of them are born in wealthy families, they have everything, they have money. Others are born in poor families, they have absolutely nothing. You cannot really blame a person for being, not very successful in life if that person is born into a bad neighborhood, if his parents are drug addicts, and if his best friends are criminals. At which point does the child become old enough to make decisions about his own life? Again, I don't know, but definitely not before the age of 12 or 13, if that. But by this time, many of the most important decisions his parents already made. They decided which school he or she will go to, which neighborhood they'll live in, and so on. So that obviously sets you on a course in life, which is very difficult to change later on. When you finally are old enough to make your own decision, it may very well be that it's too late. On the other hand, if somebody has wealthy parents, they can obviously make everything the best for their children. And so it becomes much easier for them to be successful in life if they have a great neighborhood, personal equipment at home, great computers, and so on, all these gadgets which make your life better, personal tutors, they go to the best school. Of course, then they are able to afford the best university, don't have to worry about loans or whatever else. Naturally, by the time they are 20-25 years old, their life would be already on a very different course from the first guy. So let's suppose the first guy is actually very hard working. He is born in a ghetto, he has drug addict parents, but he is very, very hard working person. He somehow strives for the best in life. Well, it will take hell a lot of effort for him to become some sort of middle manager, right? To be somebody who has no criminal history, who has a good job, makes good money. Now, if you look at the other guy, the guy whose parents have everything and who maybe got $10 million loan from them to start his own business, it would actually take a lot of effort for him to ruin his life, right? It's not impossible, mind you. Many wealthy people actually end up in jail too, but it's hard. Let's face it, he will have to put an effort to actually ruin that, because otherwise, if all he does is just continues through life without any extra effort, he will land himself into a very enviable position, and in his case, the same position, mid-type management, would already be kind of a failure. He really actually supposed to do much better than that. So going back to Plato, this is how Plato thinks society could fix that. If children are taken away from their parents as soon as they're born and they all grew up together, then perhaps everyone will have equal start in life. Of course, he also says that as soon as the guardians will see which one of them is more suited for which life, then they will decide who these children should become and give them appropriate training and education. Some of them will become workers and laborers. Those are again regular folks, nothing wrong with that, but nonetheless they will not be guardians and they will not be rulers. Others will become guardians, and the best among the guardians will eventually become rulers of the entire republic. That's how he thought things should work. And by the way, he also thought girls should have an equal chance at becoming anybody they can too. That is quite progressive for the period of time. Girls could become guardians and even rulers. No restriction there, as long as they show themselves capable. At one point, Plato actually kind of puts a remark, which probably not very feminist, by saying generally girls are not that capable, but if some of them are, by all means, let's just make them rulers too. Okay, everyone has equal chance, and note that that actually corresponds to the division in the soul. Workers and laborers, more or less equivalent of what? Which part of the soul do you think? Appetitive part. Appetitive part. The part which cares about food, sex, and drink. Those are your regular folks. How about auxiliaries? The type of guardians who are soldiers. That, of course, would be spiritual part. Spirit, the emotion, courage, that part of our soul which makes us brave, that is the part which should be soldiers. And which part should rule everything? Reason. Naturally, that is the part. So just like within the soul, within his republic, the division and the correct balance between the parts, which each part doing its own part, that is justice. That's what justice is. Note that in terms of society, what he is saying is justice is to give everybody equal chance. Because remember, the children have equal chances of becoming whoever they want. But then, once you see what they're capable of, you have to actually give them what is due. The ones who work hardest, the most capable one, will become guardians and the rulers. And the ones who care more about sex and food and other simple things will become simple folks, laborers and workers. So the justice is to let them be what they want to be, but nonetheless, within that, reward them appropriately. If you can call it reward, because he actually doesn't think any of this is a reward. Rulers are not being rewarded by becoming rulers. Rulers are philosopher kings. Now, Plato actually makes a point by saying philosophers do not want to rule. They do not want to be kings. So why do they become kings? Well, that's a burden they have to carry because they are the best ones to rule. They are the most reasonable ones. They don't care about money. They don't care about power. They don't care about anything other than the good. And the people who care about the good should rule. This is where his allegory of the cave comes in. And this is the best part of the Republic, the most famous part of the Republic. So let's look at the allegory of the cave. Okay, hopefully you will forgive my poor drawing skills. I'm not a great drawer. Nonetheless, I want to be able to explain it with something. So this is what he says allegory of the cave is. It's like a myth. It's actually a story he tells us to explain something. It has a point to it, but naturally you shouldn't take it literally. So he says, imagine a cave where you have the following. You have the wall standing in the cave and some sort of prisoners behind that wall. These prisoners are in chains. They are locked in, so they cannot move. They can only look in one direction on one wall of the cave. On that wall of the cave, they see the following. They see shadows of the cutouts. People behind the wall carrying those cutouts. This is one of these people. He carries this cutout of, in this case, a horse. Hopefully you can see I tried to draw a horse. I'm not a great drawer. Okay. Behind them is some sort of a fire and the shadow of this cutout, because the fire, obviously, light goes this way, is on the wall. So the prisoners who are sitting there in chains can only see that shadow. And this is what they think the world is. They're looking at these shadows and trying to figure out how will they move, what will they be doing. Now, there's also a way out of the cave. Every once in a while, a prisoner can manage to escape and get out of the cave all the way outside. Outside, he will see the real world. He will see the sun, and he will see the real animals and the real things. Now, what happens if this prisoner comes back and tries to explain that to other prisoners, the ones who never left? They'll make fun of him. They'll think he's crazy. They'll think that he's been confused, and now he's not even capable to figure out the important things, which are those shadows. Note that one of these prisoners would be Socrates. Socrates is the person who escaped, who saw the light, who saw the real sun. And the sun, Plato says, is the good. But when he came back to the cave, when he tried to talk to people and explain to them what the good is, these people made fun of him and even eventually killed him. So this is what philosopher is. The philosopher is the person who knows the good, who knows the life outside the cave, the real life. What else is important about it? His theory of the forms. And that again takes on from what Socrates was trying to do. Remember what Socrates was trying to do. He was trying to find those definitions of what justice is, what beauty is, what the good is, and he thought that any time we use words like this, we're actually talking about something real, something true. There is such thing as justice, there is such thing as beauty, and there is such thing as the good. But Socrates never really had a theory about it. However, Plato himself did have a theory. So let's talk about his theory of forms, the famous theory of forms, which is kind of another most important part of his philosophy. So what exactly are Platonic ideas? In Greek, he uses the word eidos, which is like a form or shape, or idea, which is more or less what we say idea. Idea is not a good word to use now, because ideas we think are in the head. And he did not think about it as being in the head. So imagine number of dogs. In the discussion we had a picture as multiple dogs. What is it in them which you talk about when you say they are dogs? When you see a dog, when you say it's a dog, it doesn't have to have 4 legs, right? It doesn't have to be any particular color. It doesn't have to have a bark even. It would still be a dog. So what is it in the dog which makes it a dog? Similarly, what is this? What is this shape? It's a circle, right? This circle is pretty bad. This one is kind of bad. This one is a little bit maybe better. This one is much better. They're all circles. What is it in them that makes us say circle? Now, we today don't think about it in this way, but what Plato was actually saying is that they all have something in common, and that in common is the idea or the form of circularity. Similarly for dog, there is this idea or form of dogness. Similarly for justice and for beauty, there is this idea or form of justice and beauty. Now, to Plato now, they actually are real things. In fact, they are the only real things. Remember when we talked about Heraclitus? Heraclitus was saying everything changes, so you can't even know anything because it changes all the time. Before you try to learn it, it changed to something else. The river always flows. Things are changing in nature. We are changing. Remember Parmenides. What did Parmenides say? Nothing changes. He says the being doesn't change. Now Plato actually was familiar with their teachings, and he kind of took them and put them together in the following way. He's saying, yes, there are things which are being, and there are things which are becoming. What is becoming? This world, what we see, what we think is real around us, constantly changes. That is the world of becoming. But it's not real. We think it's real, but it's not. Why? Well, because it changes all the time. Real stuff doesn't change. And real stuff, the being, that is something like, for example, mathematics. 3 plus 3 equals 6. That doesn't change. It was the case yesterday. Will be the case tomorrow. Geometry doesn't change. So, in the world of being, which does not change, there are forms of everything. There is a form of justice there. And that is the real justice. There is a form of beauty, and that is a real beauty. There is a form of circularity. Every time we want to figure out whether something is a circle, we actually compare it in our mind to this idea or form of circularity. Every time we want to know what is justice, we again compare it to this idea or form of justice. How do we even know that? Well, because he accepted the Pythagorean idea of our souls being eternal. Our souls knew all that in the previous life. That is how we are familiar with all that. Our souls forget what happened in the previous life, for the most part. They have to be reminded of that. Through dialectical reasoning, through philosophy, we can actually remember stuff we knew before, including what is true justice, what is true beauty, and what is true circularity. So that's what philosophy is needed for, to remind us of all these things. These things again, justice, beauty, circularity, in the world of true being, they never change. What changes is the world of becoming, this physical world around us, the world of the shadows. So in Allegory of the Cave, those shadows on the wall, cutouts, all that stuff, that's actually the fake representations of the real reality, the one which is outside the cave, the being. And the form of the good is the ultimate source of all of them. It's the sun. Simile of the sun is the source of all goodness. The sun of the good is the source of all goodness, just like the sun is the source of all light. Just like the sun makes everything visible, the goodness makes everything good. The more goodness everything has in it, the more real it is. And note that that can actually be connected to the idea of God, which is what happened later in Christianity. Now, Plato himself never talks about the good as the God. Nonetheless, we can see the similarity there. So this is how he explained reality, going back to justice, going back to why is it important to have justice. Well, because that connects us to the good. We should be, our whole life should be directed towards good, the form of the good, the other forms, the real stuff, the reality. We should think little about becoming. The world of becoming, the world where our body lives, that's not an important thing. Money, prestige, power, All of these are worldly things. They change. It's the world of becoming. One day you have power, next day you don't. One day you have money, next day you don't. It's like chasing the shadow. You can never catch it. The only reality is this world, eternal world of the truth, the goodness. And it is real. It's the only real world. Now our soul, in its reasoning part, is connected to that. But those emotions, the spiritual part, the appetitive part, they rip us apart. They can turn us into a monster if we let them. We should put them under control of our reason. And for this, we need to have our soul in order, which is what justice is. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too long and wasn't too complicated. I tried to give you Plato in a very small amount of time, and Plato is a lot more interesting and complex than that. But I guess this is the best I can do in this limited amount of time which we have. Next week we'll talk about Aristotle, but for now this is all I have. Thank you very much, guys.